Most people walk into work expecting routine, deadlines, meetings, maybe a little stress. But every so often, a normal workday turns into something unthinkable. Behind factory doors, inside office buildings, and even in places meant to feel safe, tragedy has struck in ways so shocking they still haunt investigators and co-workers years later. Today, we're diving into 5 of the most chilling workplace deaths ever recorded. Stories that prove sometimes the most dangerous place you can be is exactly where you feel the safest.
They close the gate and turn on the machine. Cases come down the line, they're pushed into a square, and the platform goes down. Then they hear a yell.
It was August 16, 2012, in Jacksonville. For 21-year-old Lawrence Day Davis, it was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, his first real job. He had just been placed at Bacardi Bottling Corporation through a staffing agency, Remedy Intelligent Staffing. The plant was loud, fast-paced, and overwhelming. He put on his orange safety vest, fixed his glasses, and took a photo of himself, smiling, proud, ready to work. He sent it to his fiancée, Alicia. They were expecting their first child that October. That picture, filled with hope, would be the last one he ever sent. His first few hours moved quickly. Paperwork, a brief safety video, and then he was sent straight onto the factory floor. There was no real hands-on training. No one walked him through the dangers of the heavy machinery around him. Most critically, he was never properly taught the lockout, tagout procedure, the basic safety step that ensures machines are completely powered down before anyone works on them. Less than 90 minutes into his shift, everything went wrong. A palletizer machine, used to stack massive loads of rum bottles, malfunctioned. Each load weighed close to 2,000 pounds. Bottles shattered, glass spread everywhere. Day was instructed to clean the debris from beneath the hoist, one of the most dangerous spots in the entire area. He followed the order without hesitation. While he was crouched underneath, sweeping broken glass, another worker, unaware that Day was still there, restarted the machine. In seconds, the palletizer roared back to life. With a deafening crash, nearly 60 cases came crashing down. The force was overwhelming. There was no time to react, no chance to escape. Moments earlier, he had been cleaning up. In the next instant, he was gone. On his very first day, barely an hour and a half into his shift, the future he was building for himself, Alicia, and their unborn child, was suddenly taken away. When Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, investigators arrived, what they uncovered was deeply troubling. Bacardi Bottling Corporation had failed to properly train its temporary workers. The lockout, tagout procedures, one of the most fundamental safety rules, had been ignored. Employees were assigned hazardous tasks without proper guidance, and supervisors allowed it to continue. OSHA issued 12 violations, including 2 classified as willful, meaning the company was aware of the rules but chose to ignore them. The total fine was $192,000, later reduced through settlement, but no penalty could measure the cost of a life. Investigators also exposed a larger, more disturbing pattern across the country. Temporary workers were often placed into high-risk environments with little to no training. Because they weren't permanent employees, they were treated as disposable, cheap labor that could easily be replaced. For some, like Day, their first shift became their last. OSHA's chief at the time, Dr. David Michaels, warned that too many temporary workers were dying within days of starting new jobs, a hidden crisis buried beneath contracts and corporate loopholes. Meanwhile, Remedy Intelligent Staffing faced no penalties, and Bacardi Bottling Corporation initially argued that Day wasn't technically their employee. OSHA pushed back, emphasizing that both the staffing agency and the host company share responsibility for worker safety. Day's story later reached a wider audience through the documentary A Day's Work. Narrated by his sister, Nia Davis, the film revealed the family's heartbreak, the grief of their mother, the confusion of his younger brothers, and the silence left behind. It even included footage from the factory floor, footage their mother could never bring herself to watch. Through tears, Nia made one thing clear. Her brother wasn't careless. He was motivated. He wanted to work, to provide, to do things the right way. But the system that promised him opportunity instead put him directly in harm's way. Today, more than 14 million Americans work as temporary employees each year. Most stay for less than 3 months, often in dangerous environments with minimal training. They're easy to overlook and even easier to replace.
A Lehigh County teenager is dead after an accident involving a wood chipper.
It was early September 2019, and Samuela Kiravakayewa was chasing a fresh start. A former schoolteacher from Fiji, he had come to Australia hoping to rebuild his life. At 40 years old, he carried the weight of a difficult year. He had recently buried his father, and his marriage had fallen apart. But despite everything, he remained determined to move forward. He found work with A1 Arbor Tree Services in Sydney. From the outside, things seemed hopeful. He shared photos standing proudly near landmarks like the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, small moments that showed he was embracing his new life. To his family and friends back home, he looked like a man pushing through pain, refusing to give up. But that hope wouldn't last. On the morning of September 7th, 2019, a Saturday, Samuela was working at a school site in Cromer alongside 2 co-workers. His job was to feed branches into a wood chipper, a machine designed to shred timber quickly and without mercy. He wasn't supposed to be feeding it by hand. The machine's own specifications required a mechanical log loader. There were clear warnings stamped onto it. Danger. Do not hand feed this machine. Severe injury or death can result. Those warnings were ignored. At one point, his co-workers stepped away briefly to move a car, leaving him alone with the machine. Samuela kept working, continuing to feed in branches, unaware that he was now completely exposed to a deadly risk. Then, in a single moment, everything went wrong. He was pulled into the machine. The wood chipper didn't slow down, it didn't stop. His body was dragged into the infeed hopper and toward the powerful internal drum. There was no time to react, no chance to escape. By the time his co-workers returned, it was already over. They were met with a horrifying scene. Blood splattered across the machine, making it painfully clear what had happened. Shock turned into panic as they called emergency services, struggling to even describe the situation. An investigation was launched by SafeWork Nezet, and what they uncovered was deeply disturbing. A1 Arbor Tree Services had failed on multiple levels. The machine was not meant to be operated the way it was used. Safety warnings had been ignored. There was no proper risk assessment, no adequate training, and no enforcement of safe procedures. Even worse, the equipment had known faults before that day, yet it was still put into operation. The court later ruled that the tragedy was entirely preventable. The risks were obvious, and the steps to avoid them were simple, but they were never taken. Initially, the company was fined $3 million, later reduced to $2.25 million after a guilty plea. But no penalty could undo what had happened. Sophie Coates called it exactly what it was, an avoidable tragedy. She emphasized that no one should have to risk their life just to earn a living, and that safety laws exist for a reason. Ignoring them, even for a moment, can have irreversible consequences. Samuela left behind grieving family and friends who remembered him as humble, hardworking, and full of warmth, a man who had already endured so much, only to lose his life in such a brutal and preventable way.
Lucas and Coward were resting in one chamber of the habitat, exhausted after several days of working overtime. Bergerson and Hellevick had just finished working at a site far below. They had been sent down to inspect a valve, expecting to be underwater for just 1 hour.
It was the early hours of November 5th, 1983, aboard the Byford Dolphin, stationed in the freezing waters of the North Sea. A team of saturation divers, Edwin Arthur Coward, Roy P. Lucas, Björn G. Bergerson, and Truls Hellis, had just completed another brutal shift deep beneath the surface. These were experienced men used to extreme conditions, crushing pressure, total darkness, and near freezing temperatures. Above them, dive tenders William Crammond and Martin Saunders worked through their routine, securing the diving bell and maintaining the pressurized system. It was a process they had done countless times before. Everything felt controlled, predictable, safe, until suddenly it wasn't. Saturation diving is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. At depths of 500 to 1,000 feet, the human body cannot survive without specialized support. Divers rely on carefully balanced helium-oxygen gas mixtures and live inside pressurized chambers that replicate deep-sea conditions. This allows them to remain at depth for weeks at a time, avoiding constant decompression. But when their work is finished, they must return slowly to normal pressure through a precise, step-by-step process. There's no room for mistakes. Even the smallest error can be fatal. That morning, a single mistake triggered a chain reaction. The diving bell had just docked with the chamber system, and the divers were transitioning back through a narrow passage known as the trunk. Inside, Coward and Lucas had already settled in. Bergerson and Hellick were in the process of entering. Crammond and Saunders were assisting, just another routine transfer. Then, everything went wrong. The clamp securing the diving bell, designed to keep the system sealed under extreme pressure, was released too early. In an instant, the internal pressure dropped from 9 atmospheres to just 1. The decompression was explosive. Inside the chamber, there was no warning. The sudden pressure change caused gases dissolved in the divers' blood to expand violently. Their bodies couldn't withstand it. Coward, Lucas, and Bergerson were killed instantly as their internal systems catastrophically failed. Truel's Hellick was positioned closest to the partially opened door, and what happened next was even more horrific. The force of the decompression pulled him toward the opening, forcing his body through the narrow gap with devastating violence. The pressure differential tore him apart in an instant, scattering remains across the rig's deck. At the same moment, William Crammond, the tender who had released the clamp, was struck by the diving bell as it was violently displaced by the blast of escaping air. He was killed immediately. Martin Saunders survived, but with severe injuries and the trauma of witnessing the catastrophe. Later, investigations revealed that fatigue may have contributed. Crammond had been working a long, exhausting shift, but it wasn't just human error. The rig's pressurization system itself had critical design flaws. There were no proper fail-safes to prevent the chamber from being opened while still under pressure. A system that should have protected the crew instead left them vulnerable. It took 26 years before the Norwegian government and the operators of the rig formally accepted responsibility and compensated the victims' families. By then, the Byford Dolphin disaster had already become one of the most infamous tragedies in the history of deep-sea diving. A grim reminder of how quickly routine can turn into catastrophe when human error collides with the unforgiving forces of pressure and the sea.
A zookeeper has died after being attacked by a tiger at South Lakes Wild Animal Park in the UK.
In May 2013, a place built to inspire awe and showcase wildlife became the setting for a devastating tragedy. South Lakes Safari Zoo had just opened for the day when a young zookeeper stepped into the tiger enclosure, expecting nothing more than a routine shift. By the end of that morning, Sarah McClay would lose her life, forcing the entire zoo industry to confront how fragile the boundary is between safety and disaster. Sarah was only 24. Originally from Glasgow and living in Barrow-in-Furness, she had been working full-time at the park since 2011. Over time, she gained experience handling some of the most dangerous animals in the world. Her family, her mother Fiona, and siblings Stephen and Lucy, often described her as careful and disciplined, someone who followed every rule and double-checked her work. She believed deeply in safety, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. That's what made what happened next so difficult to comprehend. On May 24th, Sarah was carrying out routine cleaning and feeding duties inside the tiger house. The enclosure had been designed with multiple layers of protection, indoor and outdoor sections separated by secure, lockable doors, ensuring that keepers and tigers were never in the same space at the same time. But without her knowledge, a critical part of that system had already failed. A faulty bolt on one of the internal doors, considered a third line of defense behind 2 sliding gates, had loosened. It created a small gap, just 20 to 25 millimeters wide, almost invisible, easy to miss, but it was enough. Through that narrow opening, Padang, a male Sumatran tiger, forced his way into the keeper's corridor. What followed happened in seconds. The tiger entered the space where Sarah was working and launched a sudden, violent attack. There was no warning, no chance to react. By the time her colleagues realized something was wrong, she had already suffered devastating injuries. Emergency responders airlifted her to Royal Preston Hospital, but the injuries were too severe. She could not be saved. The shock spread far beyond the zoo. Investigators later described the incident as a tragic combination of human diligence, mechanical failure, and the unpredictable nature of working with apex predators. Safety systems had been in place, but when one critical component failed, everything collapsed. The inquest revealed uncomfortable truths. It concluded that the tiger gained access due to a mix of open gates and the defective door mechanism. Crucially, it confirmed that Sarah herself had not been careless. The zoo admitted to breaching the Health and Safety at Work Act, 1974, acknowledging failures in maintenance and staff protection. South Lakes Safari Zoo was fined $255,000, ordered to pay $150,000 in prosecution costs, and an additional $2,500 related to a separate big cat safety incident the following year. After her death, the park introduced stricter maintenance checks, improved safety procedures, and updated staff training protocols, changes that came too late for Sarah. For her family, the loss never faded. Her mother, Fiona, later spoke about the years of trauma and grief that followed, including undergoing long-term therapy. A life defined by care, discipline, and passion for animals had been cut short by a failure that should never have happened. It was a scorching afternoon in 2014 in Davie. Hernand Gutierrez, a 42-year-old landscaper originally from Guatemala, arrived at a quiet residential job site with two co-workers. He had spent 14 years in the United States, working tirelessly and saving what he could, all with one goal in mind: to eventually leave landscaping behind and start his own roofing business. To those who knew him, Hernand was full of optimism. His girlfriend, Karen Gomez Pereira, remembered him as someone who stayed positive no matter how tough things got. They had plans for the future, talks of marriage, a life they were slowly building together. That Monday felt like any other. Just another long day under the unforgiving sun, clearing brush and pushing through the heat. But everything changed in an instant. That afternoon, the crew was working with a large industrial wood chipper, a powerful machine designed to shred branches with relentless force. Around 4:15 p.m., something went terribly wrong. Exactly how it happened remains unclear. Whether it was a slip, a moment of exhaustion, or something else entirely, no one can say for certain. But somehow, Hernand was pulled into the machine. It happened in seconds. A nearby resident, Cheryl Lapel, later described seeing one of his co-workers running down the street in complete panic, screaming and waving his arms before collapsing against a fence in shock. Emergency crews arrived quickly, but even experienced responders were deeply shaken by what they encountered. Dale Angle, a police captain with decades of experience, later admitted he had never witnessed anything like it. As the sun went down, officers were still working at the scene, recovering remains from the debris. The emotional toll was immediate. Crisis counselors were brought in, and some responders needed support right away, unable to process what they had just seen. Karen learned of the tragedy through one of Hernand's co-workers. The words came slowly, broken by emotion. "You have to be strong." But in the face of such sudden loss, strength felt impossible. Hernand had spent years building a life far from home, chasing opportunity, holding on to hope. In a matter of moments, everything he had worked for was gone. Back in Guatemala, the family he hadn't seen in over a decade would now receive him not for a reunion, but for a final goodbye. The company he worked for expressed condolences as investigations began, with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, stepping in to examine the circumstances. But for those who knew Hernand, no explanation could ease the loss. Incidents involving industrial machinery are not unheard of, but this one left a deeper mark. Hernand wasn't just another worker on a job site. He was someone with plans, with love, with a future he was carefully trying to build. Those who witnessed the aftermath described it as something they would never forget. In the weeks and months that followed, the trauma lingered, not only for his loved ones, but for co-workers, neighbors, and first responders alike. His story became a haunting reminder that even the most ordinary day can turn tragic without warning. and that the very tools people rely on to earn a living can, in a single moment, take everything away.